Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. This episode of Slam the Gavel is sponsored by CPS Protect Consulting Services. A child protective services case is one of the most frightening experiences for any parent. Don't face it alone. Face it with confidence with Urgent Assist by CPS Protect. You can have access to former CPS investigators to make sure you preserve your rights and protect your family. If you're facing CPS involvement and aren't sure where to turn, their child welfare consultants can help you. Visit cpsprotect.com/subscribe and enter the coupon code Slam the Gavel for 60% off your first year of Urgent Assist. And this is available in all 50 states. My next announcement, Bradley's mother, Narcus Golan, passed away in the fall of 2022. Bradley is autistic and needs structured routine and therapies he receives for his autism 6 days a week. However, Italy just entrusted Bradley to the Italian Social Services. If he is ruled to go back, he will face the next 3 to 4 years in the Italian foster care system where he can't speak or understand the language. He will then be taken away from the only family he has ever known, and we have Judge Ann Donnelly to thank for that. And please call Governor Hochul at 518-474-8390 to please keep Bradley here safe in these United States. That's Governor Hochul at 518-474-8390. Hashtag keep Bradley safe. My last announcement, go to the site, pleasedoyourjob.com. We need 2,500 more signatures to get a case reopened. This is very important. Pleasedoyourjob.com. I have a return guest on. I have Laura Thomason back on. She's a counselor and advocate for at-risk youth suffering through the foster care system, which is what we talked about the last time. And today she's got some updates because her grandkids are and have been home for well over a year. And she's won the battle but lost the war. And she's advocating for foster care children. And she has gotten her master's in science and human services, specializing in community and social services. And she also studied the human trafficking correlation with foster care children. And I totally welcome you, Laura. How are you this morning?
Good, Mary, and how are you?
Pretty good. So you've been a busy bee.
Yes, I have been. It's slowed down quite a bit since I graduated. So,
Well, that's
uh,
good.
yeah, absolutely. So, thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it very much. So, it's been a long time. I've got your book.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
mhm. I haven't had a chance to sit down and read it, but as soon as I do, I'm gonna give you a review on that.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
do you want to start out? Is there any questions, or do you just want me to
Well,
just?
tell me what happened. Like, when you finished your master's when?
Oh, it's September. Just
Oh,
September.
I thought I saw that on Facebook. Yes. And so you studied this correlation with the human trafficking and the family, I'm sorry, foster care children. I was
Mhm.
going to say family court, but that's also a part of the human
Yes.
trafficking. So, tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I started advocating, for my grandchildren and for a girl that, well, I advocated for children. I was working um, in that field, behavioral health field with at-risk youth, which many of them ended up in foster care. So I had my run-ins with child welfare on a professional level. And then I had been fostering my grandchildren. My grandchildren were removed from me out of retaliation. I lost my position. And so it has been a battle since then. But during that battle, and the children are home, they are home with their mother.
Mhm.
Um, there is some scars, emotional scars, but they're thriving and doing really well. So I'm really happy about that. So I during that advocacy time, a time of advocacy, I realized how many children were missing, and then Missouri had a report come out around that same time in October of 2021, indicating that there were 978 missing foster children that in itself was horrific. But if you think about that, you also have to consider the fact that only 34% of those children were reported missing. Only 34% of those children were reported. So the other percentage of those children were not reported. In America, we have closed over 100,000 missing children reports, closed them, discharged them from the system so that the system does not have to be responsible for that. Connecticut reported that 88 children rescued from minor sex trafficking, 86 were from foster care. In 2007, New York identified 2,250 child victims of trafficking, and 75% came from foster care. So we know we have a big problem. And in my degree, I decided that I would focus on this main issue within the children's division, because there is many, like you said, Marianne. Family court is a no due process. Corruption. It's just it's abuse of power. In most courtrooms. There's very few that run justified, you know. But so I decided that I wanted to become an advocate and expand the advocacy. And so I started focusing on the lost ones. But to focus on those, I had to also look at the whole landscape of children's division. I had to look at it as a whole. So I needed to know how it functioned and the money pot, the money situation around it. So in 1935, the leaders of Children's Bureau shaped several titles, including Social Security Act. What came to play was the Prevention and Treatment Act, which is CAPTA. So this money flow is like it's an uncapped, endless pot of money. And it is entitlement that individual state expenditures will match it. So basically, to cut this short, the funding comes per head, per child. Some of the movements have been asking to make that per capita, but right now it's per head, per child. So basically, they have to have children in foster care to get the funding, which is, you know, another thing is that there's the child status for qualifying for Title 4E funding, which is foster care. It is foster care, and the Title 4E funding, but the child status has to be that they have to meet a certain criteria to get this funding. And you pretty much have to be really poor, or the poor people basically qualify to fit the funding. So it's not like DFS is not called into higher middle class families. And, you know, they get called as well, but they don't get as many removals because poor people are overrepresented, very much so. So it seems as if there is more family discord in people who are of poverty, when they're in all reality, it's how the money is distributed.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's just all very scary. Going back to the Missouri issue, these kids missing, from what I understand, the FBI didn't even look for any of them.
You know, what happened was, and don't quote me because but what happened was they were looking for some missing children. And so 3 entities, which was the local police department, the Department of Justice, and was it the FBI? I'm having a brain freeze here. Let me see if I can find that information. U.S. Department of Health. Okay, so anyways, these entities were looking for children. They noticed that all these children that they were finding on the streets were in foster care. So that opened up a huge investigation with federal watchdogs. And so the report came out. There was, out of those kids that were missing, they like focused on 50 something of them, like 50 something cases. Out of those cases, one of them was trafficked over 4 states, for sure, trafficked over 4 states. Um, let's see here. The the ethical dilemmas is so many. There's so many ethical dilemmas in this, like, and I question ethics versus morals.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think they're the same thing. It's not the same thing. Um, Ethics will keep you in some ways in silence, whereas more sometimes you have to make a more of a moral decision, which is what I chose to do when I spoke up and stood against the system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my lawsuit is still it's still active,
Mm-hmm.
still being protected under the whistleblower statute, and moving forward with that. But there is so many ethicals, like they use their confidentiality as a way to keep things secret that shouldn't be known. There's usually signs and symptoms, something that tells them that these kids are at risk of running. They know what children come back into the system who have been trafficked. They know who they are, and then they recruit other children to go back out into trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And the DFS, some of them have been known to call them kids moles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're the kids that come in and get the other kids to go back out. But there's no programs built to prevent for prevention, to address anything to do with foster children being trafficked. Like, there's absolutely no programs around here that focus only on that. And any program that they do have is still funded under the Title 40 funding. So it's still not benefiting the families.
Mm.
You know,
Yep.
it just isn't. It's
You know, this is why the taxpayer needs to know about this Title IV D and E funding and B. Um, it's so important that they know where their monies are going, which is just, for lack of a better term, torturing families.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, the caseworkers that just blow into somebody's house and just remove kids, and people think, oh, that won't happen to me, but these things can happen to anybody.
Yes, it happens to anybody. And so there's so many statistics out there, so many studies that have been done, of finding these children, locating these kids on the streets, and then identifying that they have came from the foster care system, and a lot of them are runaways. So they're, and you hear, well, we do have programs for transitioning age children. We do have, scholarships or different things. So if they're even in those places where there is programs, why are these children rejecting them? Why are they ready to run immediately? Running at 11, 12 years old,
Oh.
ending up on the streets at 11, 12, 13 years old, and it ended up in the cities. And if there's not trafficking going on, they a lot of times refer to it as survival sex, but it is a form of trafficking. So it is somebody exploiting a child for a sexual, you know, um, favor. It is trafficking them.
Mhm. it's such a shame that this is how our youth and our veterans are being treated, just being thrown on the streets as well. And,
Yeah.
I've also heard that when a child reaches 18, they're just set
Mhm.
free from the foster care system that will eventually haunt them later on when they have a family. So they're
Mhm.
never really out of the system?
Never really out of the system. They take There's so many cases where the child, was removed from their parents, and then they end up losing their children to foster care, and it just continues to go generation after generation.
Mhm,
Um, it it is I mean, it's definitely systemic, but it is definitely like people are over certain populations are overrepresented,
mm,
like there is more white children in foster care. However, there Black children are overrepresented. So, like, if five families, say five white families, five Black families, get the welfare called on them, the Black families are more likely to lose their children than white families.
mhm,
So, when people, it is overrepresented populations. So, a person of poverty is more likely going to lose their children versus someone who has an income of 250,000 a year,
mhm,
because they qualify for Title 4E funding. So you also see that overrepresentation because in our inner cities, you have people who have several runaway children
mhm,
that depend on them. See, the people, like, I worked for an anti-trafficking coalition for a while, and what people don't understand is that many times the psychological abuse that happens to these kids,
mhm,
they become almost to where they feel like that person who is hurting them, who is, you know, exploiting them, is their only safe haven.
mm,
So when you help one of these young people, you have to understand that in the whole, as a whole, because a lot of people will think, well, they keep running back to him. Why do they keep running back to him? Well, you have to get behind that, the psychology behind that. That's all they know. They feel safe there. They've been exploited for money their whole lives. They, have had everybody's getting paid, and so it's not uncommon for them. A lot of times they need to survive, so they do what they have to do to survive.
mhm.
And the most common age for child trafficking, the most wanted is between 9 and 11. That is like the most wanted age of child of a predator. And these kids are perfect prey. I mean, they prey upon these kids because of all of their vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
And we don't do nothing to protect them as a whole. You've got a few people out here that are lobbying for laws to be changed. But even though laws get changed, if people are not held accountable to them laws, because there's some good laws out there,
Mhm.
but they're not held accountable. So the neglect continues to happen within the system.
And it's very difficult to hold anyone accountable, um, because I ran my own federal lawsuit, and it did go to the appellate level, but then they dismiss it like they always do, and it's li how does anyone get any redress here?
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of power.
Mhm,
Yeah. A lot of power given to those entities. Um, like, for example, the Maya case. I'm sure you've heard of the Maya case. Um, the caseworker got off of any charges, um, because of the immunity.
Mm.
you know? So everybody else is going to be held liable, the hospital, but the caseworkers got off because of the immunity. Um, if the thing is a lot of these guardian ad litems are attorneys, and then a lot of the attorneys are in our lawmakers.
Mm.
So to end to end that, we're not going to get in favor of ending immunity,
Mhm.
even though we try, because a lot of them it would be personal to them, meaning they wouldn't have immunity. So it is a war out here. Like you said, I won a battle with my grandkids, but the war is not over,
Mm.
It's definitely not. It's not. These kids are still at very high risk of being trafficked. And Marianne, it's like the bottom line is, and the bottom thought, I could be, sitting here analyzing, um, you know, looking up statistics, everything, but the bottom line is, where are the kids? Like, where are the kids? Like, that's the thing. It's you go back to, but where are the children?
Mhm.
Like, where are they? It is it's mind boggling,
Mm.
because you don't know where, you can't even imagine what they could be going through, even if
Right.
they're with us any longer.
Mhm.
That's how wretched the world is out there for those children who are on the streets.
It's almost, it's just, I feel like it's just not safe to bring a baby into this world if you've got this hanging over your head.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a sad world we live in. Absolutely.
Well, parents can't parent. They cannot raise their families the way they were raised. There's too much interference from these caseworkers that get away with everything.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, you're right about that. They do. Very many,
Mhm.
and very many of, and I've met, and I have, um, I know a couple caseworkers who are very good hearted, and do their best, and love, and love, try to honor all the rules, and love their job, but um, they don't understand the system.
Mm-mm.
It's almost like everybody's programmed to finalize that by removing that child, that is saving that child every single time. That when they make that conscious decision to remove that child, except for the ones who do stuff out of spite,
Mhm.
and there is those too, but
Yeah, there are.
the to just to make that conscious decision,
Mhm.
could but if one person has that power, one person, the judge has to sign off on it, but they don't have to present that. They can take them without presenting the judges signing off on it. um they changed the law to allow that, because they said that there's some very, very severe cases that they can't wait until the judge can sign off, so they have the authority, the power to remove the child without that being finalized. So yeah, it's way too much power for one person. They could be having a bad day, you know and take something wrong, or personalize something, and just go in there, or just bluntly lie, you
Mhm.
know, and go in there and have somebody's children completely removed. There's way too much power, because even in the courtroom, you may have the guardian ad litem, you have the juvenile officer, you have the attorneys, then you have caseworker, you have usually the caseworker's manager, supervisor, and but the bottom line is, the caseworker makes all the decisions.
Mm.
When it comes to it, they're going to do what the caseworker recommends,
Mm.
almost always. Almost always.
Always.
Mhm.
Even
Yeah.
if they're perjuring themselves all over the stand, and I've seen that up close and in person myself. And I don't know what to say. It's just, it's running rampant in these courtrooms.
It is really no due process at all.
No.
They don't have to prove anything. It's arbitrary justice,
Mhm.
you know. It isn't fair. I mean, they take people in divorce court and they take every penny they have.
Mhm.
Um, Many times DFS steps in and takes the child, you know. It's not good. It's not good.
I don't know if you have the stats on this. I should have asked you earlier before we got on, not to put you on the spot, but what are the tax dollars that the taxpayer isn't aware of that's being used to remove these kids, even kids out of good homes, you know?
Mhm. Well, it is an endless pot of money, and like I said, whatever the government places, the state matches. Um, the exact numbers, I don't have those statistics, but you can look up the report, the financial report. Their annual reports are just and see that, but it's up there. It's in the high millions.
Mm,
Um, it's a lot, and you know, the programs that if you're just an average taxpayer and you know nothing about the operations or the landscape or how the money flows or any of that,
mhm,
and you hear that your money is going to a program that, you know, helps children who have been abused severely or neglected severely, um, in all areas of their life, that makes you feel like, okay, I don't mind my taxpayer dollars going to help that. But they don't understand that in most situations, that's not the way it is.
mhm,
Those programs, if they exist, don't operate, function properly. And, you know, the kids end up in on medical straitjackets. I mean, Missouri was sued for over medicating foster children,
mm,
sued literally, you know, for over medicating foster children. People just sweep that stuff out of under the rug, and that's another reason why I continue to speak out, even though it has, you know, not been easy. It's not been easy at all, you know, to speak out and risk, uh, you know, your career and everything. But it is, you have to do what you have to do, what is right.
mhm,
And um, these kids are at risk, and there's nothing that's going to stop them that's set in place right now. Um, they said that they now, I guess in Missouri, they have 2 hours to report a missing child, which is very good.
mhm,
Then they have so long to report it to the police. Then the police have so long to report it to um, the Department of Justice, and it just goes on and on. So if they do that, that's kind of good. But here's the thing: they're not trained to deal with children who have been trafficked. So they're not trained. We need programs where professionals that are, you know, trained to trauma response, you know, trauma informed, and that are can go in and help these kids, you
mm,
know, that aren't under the Title 40 funding. Because once you're under that funding, you're pretty much tied to all those ethics and policies and procedures, and
mhm,
Medicaid and all of the above to worry about, you know. Um, it needs to be a third party for sure.
mhm. You know, it just, you know, some people just think, well, why not just get rid of CPS and have the police do their job?
Mhm.
I mean, why have these caseworkers that are sometimes even going under a different name? I've had people on my podcast that have said the caseworker went under a different name. And then, again, they're perjuring themselves everywhere, and they may have a grudge against a parent.
Mhm.
Uh, it's just a nightmare. I just don't think we need the CPS. Why not just use the police, have the police do their job?
Right, right. I I agree with you. The one thing that I have realized though that is certain is that there is those children that do need that immediate rescue. And so if it was for the police to do, they would definitely have to have some type of program that's established for children that do need intervention.
Mhm,
Because a lot of some of the cases that where CPS has failed children
mhm,
that I've come across are CPS left them in the home with their biological parents, and then they end up dead. And then I've heard many, many stories of foster parents. So it's like once the children become a part of the system, those children that actually become a part of the system, um, if they could that need to become a part of something, need that intervention, if they would focus on those instead of taking everybody else's kids,
mhm.
they don't help the kids that are in need the most,
Right.
because those children are harder to place. Um, they come in and they automatically assume these children have behavioral issues, and a lot of times they'll put them on psychotropic medications, and then they get labeled as a troubled child, and they get more funding, and it just and then that child grows up. And I have talked to foster children that are like teenagers that will refer to themselves like this
Mhm,
because they've been labeled so many times. They will say something like, oh, ignore me if I tap because I have OCD, and I can't stay here very long with you because I have ADHD, and they just go on and they have 5 or 6 diagnoses. And you're looking at and you're thinking they have trauma, you know, and maybe some of those diagnoses are legit,
mhm,
but uh, I mean, they've been labeled their whole life. So
yeah,
how would they know unless they get the proper intervention, and then the fact that Missouri got sued for over medicating foster children,
mhm,
it just proves the it all to be true that they failed these kids dramatically.
mhm,
And by the time these kids grow up and get away from that, oh, they've had so much damage.
mhm. Well, and like you said, which was great, get somebody trained to deal with children that have been trafficked and get them counseling that they need to overcome what has happened to them.
Mhm.
Get like remove CPS, have the police do their job, and they can have maybe a department within the police to deal with these children that have been trafficked. Maybe I'm just throwing it out there, like psychologists that know
Mhm.
how to handle these kids.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I always say it's better to save a child than fix a broken grown up,
Yeah.
because it is very hard, some of these kids' lives, you
Mhm,
know, very, very, very hard. Prior to foster care, sometimes some of them, uh, and then in foster care, and then on the streets. And then by the time that they're 19, 20 years old, they're addicted to drugs, just
mhm,
losing their lives, and um, end up their children going into foster care, and just a vicious cycle.
mhm,
There is a lot of children who have came out of foster care and have made their lives better and overcome a lot, but there's many, many more that have not, so
Yeah,
it's sad.
it's just very, very frustrating on, yeah, and sometimes, in some cases where CPS actually does their job, but yet there's collusion within the court system that they're ignoring what's going on, that they'll ignore, um, what the caseworker is saying, or, like you hear of these cases where, CPS was called 10 times and no one did anything about it, and the child died.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's their failure is in neglect as well as, and that's what makes it such a conflict with people is that they themselves commit what they take other people, what they take children away from.
Mhm,
They themselves commit those same acts that they're accusing the parents of.
mhm,
Same acts, the neglect. That is neglect. 987 in 1 year. That's not 100. That's not 200. That's not 300. That's 987 in 1 year. That Missouri lost. That's neglect. That's neglect. And if they would have been their child that's missing,
mhm,
it would have been all over the news. You know, it
mhm.
would have been uh, um, more attention would have been given to it. Some of these kids, only 34% were reported. So the rest of them, nobody was looking for them, not anybody. They just disappeared. I have stories attached to my dissertation um, that of one particular woman who, when she was a child, was trafficked across 3 or 4 states.
Mhm.
And then I also have another story on there and where she was trafficked to Texas. And, and in the foster care system by caseworkers,
Mhm, mhm.
people are like, no, that stuff doesn't happen. I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry. Unfortunately, that stuff happens. It does happen. I've got people that have those stories. They've lived it.
Mhm.
So it's sad.
Well, I know
It
I was
is.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said it's a scary world.
Yes, I was at a gathering with some friends, and I was trying to tell them about some of this, and one of my friends covered her ears saying, "No, I don't wanna hear this." And it's well, it's happening, and people wanna just ignore it.
Yes. They do want to ignore it because it's easier. We don't like to have mental distress.
Mhm,
And as humans, we'll do anything that will ease that mental distress.
mhm.
If ignoring something and not paying attention to something, out of sight, out of mind, out of mind, out of sight. Um, yeah,
I don't know. I mean, people have to know about this. This is happening, and this, these children that they're our future, and they're coming out of this, foster care system so uh, broken and beaten down. And then, as I said earlier, when they go and have their families, they're going to have a knock on their door again.
hmm yeah,
It's an endless cycle. And why does this have to happen? It's the taxpayers need to know about these incentives and where they're going and, what's really happening with these kids.
yeah, yeah. The incentives are like I think that it was 4,500 uh, per child after adoption, bonus, or I don't know what they call it, a bonus incentive. What's the difference? But
Mhm,
then 2,500 more, I think, or 2,000 more when the child is considered special needs.
mhm.
So that's like 7,500 or something like, or somewhere up there. They get, and that's after adoption. So and then they continue like uh, to dip in for that child even now. And in Missouri, they've really gotten to where they have made it easy to adopt
Hmm.
out of foster care. They've made it very easy to adopt out of foster care. They've made it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Um, there's a lot of our people that are lawmakers that are foster parents or foster grandparents. Um, so, our governor is a foster grandparent. So um, they have made it to where they're focused on prevention very little compared to being focused on how to get kids out of foster care by adoption. So they also have bonuses, are not bonuses, tax breaks, tax cuts. So now, yeah, if you've adopted a child out of foster care, you get a tax cut. So, and it is not that some children don't need to be, and that's the thing. That's what makes it so hard. It's not a black and white thing. You can't just say end it all or build it high. You can't say either or because it's such a complicated um, like I always say that corruption diverts talent to an endless waste,
Hmm.
and that's what it's like. It's just it is a mess, and the average person does not know, and the average person does not want to know, and will almost believe just the opposite just to ease the mental distress, of the truth.
Right, right. But I think, they came out with that movie Sound of Freedom. Do you think that has, you know, opened up eyes? It seems like I don't hear anyone talking about that film anymore. It's like it's faded off into the sunset.
I think it did open up a bunch of people's eyes because a lot of movement has happened after that, and a lot of people, churches and stuff, throwing um, having events where they have uh, the local anti-trafficking organization come in and speak.
Mhm.
I think it did, but then they wanted to, some of the news, stations casted it as it was like, a QAnon thing, or, that it don't happen. People, as long as people can make themselves believe that, um, they can overlook it because, like I said, it gives them mental distress, and it's easy to not want that. But yeah, I feel like the same. I feel the same. I feel like it's gotten silent again.
Mhm. You know, where I mean, if people want to reach you for questions, I'm sure you have people contacting you anyway on Facebook because you're very out there on Facebook too.
Um, Laura, it's Laura. Actually, let me give you this. Let me give you a different email. Sorry.
Okay.
It's L.A. Thomason, last name, 1 at cougars.ccis.edu.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put that in the podcast notes, but, have you found on Facebook you've got people contacting you a lot?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I stepped back a little bit from, uh, being a parent aide, like the advocacy on that. I was doing a lot of working with like a couple of the local lawmakers, and then I went to Washington a couple times, and um, just advocacy rallies, whatever we can get together and talk to news stations, whoever and will listen. You
Mhm.
know, that was one thing I was asked by an attorney in a suit was how many people I've told, and I said as many people that'll listen as often as I possibly can tell them. So it's hard to tell you, sir,
Right.
because I've told a lot of people.
Mhm. And
So,
and rights, people need to know. They have a right to know that this is happening.
mhm. Yes, they have a right to know.
And so, if you could offer advice to, you know, parents who, maybe that could be at risk or, you know, what advice can you give them to be safe from having their kids taken?
Well, first of all, know your rights.
Mhm.
Um, I believe know your rights. I think that one of the things that is good is that Connie regularly is working on is we are putting together an advocacy. Well, she's got an advocacy, her and some other like Maureen and Kathleen Arthur and stuff. They've put together um, some laws that would also address that. But I think that just by knowing your state laws and stand your ground, you don't have to let them in, you
Mm.
know, you do not. I'm not saying don't. Um, I think that depends. That's pretty much case to case. But I don't, you don't sign nothing. Don't know your rights. Just know your rights, you know. I wish that the system wasn't broken and it did work because a lot of families reach out because they need help.
Mhm.
And like in my case, when I was the one who reached out for my son.
Mhm.
Uh, and it ended up being the worst mistake I ever made and a nightmare, an
Mhm.
absolute nightmare. So, and people that are not personally affected by it need to realize that this happens. Children are abused in the foster care system. Um, the best way to prevent child trafficking out of foster care system is to prevent children from being removed from their homes in the first place. So if we can't work toward that, we're going to continue to have an overwhelmed foster care system.
I agree. Well, that was well said, really. I'm so glad I had you on. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Um, so I think we covered a lot. Um, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I'm gonna
And
have you back on, so, you know, I'd like
okay,
to have you back on because this was very informative.
okay.
So I appreciate you coming on and, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I am your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, and Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. And you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple iTunes, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, and feel free to donate to buy me a coffee to keep the podcast going. Thank you so much, Laura Thomason. You will be back.